absolutely different.
Mr. Lehmann forward and also foreseated that our system is also.
Thank you very much. That's great. Read the book. Book on my desk in the office. This book is a very good book.
Yeah, we report on that.
I'm sorry.
Genau.
So, we welcome you all to the second part of this morning, and we hope you enjoyed the break. And also a huge thank you, welcome to our new panel discussion guests. You will be introduced to them in a few moments.
We would now like to hand over the microphone to the lecturer for international relations, Professor Michael G.
So thank you all very much. We've already enjoyed a fascinating introduction and speech from Dr. Lehmann. I'm not going to introduce Dr. Lehmann again. I think you've had a chance to get to know him. But we have 3 additional guests joining us now. And it's very difficult to know which order to put people in because there are experiences and different knowledge. So I'm just going to simply do it in alphabetical order, if that's okay. And you notice that the person beginning with A is now smiling. Dr. Jan Atteslander studied at the University of Bern. He studied business and economics, took his PhD there. He worked in a number of organizations, including the Federal Department of Finance and Swiss Holdings. And today he's the head of foreign trade for Economy Suisse. So let's welcome Jan Atteslander. Our next guest, I could spend the hour and a half going through his biography, but I'm going to keep it very short. I hope you forgive me. But Dr. Rudolph Strahm studied chemistry and then moved on to economics. So we heard earlier that there are people who study sciences but don't understand humanities. But we have someone who knows something about sciences and something about, maybe not humanities, but social sciences. He was a long-serving member of the Swiss Parliament, General Secretary of the SP Switzerland. He was very well known as a price commissioner. He's a recognized author and expert on a range of issues, and we're very, very happy to have Dr. Strahm here with us today. Next, but purely alphabetically in this order, Professor Kristyna Ters. After studying her bachelor's here, this is actually a story of someone who, some time ago, was at our school. She went on to the University of Basel, where she did her master's. Her PhD was at the University of Basel, but also working with the Bank for International Settlements, where she carried out research. And today she still works with the Bank for International Settlements together with the Uni Basel and is a lecturer at our university. So welcome, Kristyna Ters. So, we heard before about some ideas about where we are in terms of globalization, some of the challenges and some of the possible responses to that. But I'd like to bring in our new speakers. So maybe we'll just go down the line, and please feel free to modify the question to your particular subject area. But for you, what is the biggest concern that you have regarding globalization, this time of quite rapid change? And we'll start with Dr. Atteslander.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me and for the warm welcome. The biggest concern right now is that we stick to the rules of the World Trading System, continue, and it's under considerable stress. We see about 1 or 2 protectionist measures by the week. So it's now Friday. We have 2 or 3 more protectionist measures somewhere in the world compared to this Monday. So that's my biggest concern right now at the moment.
So it's really on the institutional level, the degree to which nations or organizations, when you're speaking about nations keeping to the basic rules of world trade, you're talking about WTO rules or things like that, maybe you go through.
Yeah, absolutely. If we see that, for example, we can elect the president in the United States, and he starts saying, well, if we take this or that measure and it's not in line with WTO, so we just pull out. And this is isolationist populist thinking. We see in other areas where, for example, investment protection is not given anymore, although all these countries have signed many agreements, are member of the ICSID Convention and so on. So we see here stress. It can be in Russia, it can be in Brazil and all other regions, so including Switzerland and others. Now, the fun ends when W rules are definitely breached, which is normally not the case. Most of the countries just go, you must know that much better than I, just go to the level they can, and then they stop. But still, the trend here is rather protectionist, with one big exception, China. China is rather following a policy of opening up its market compared to other regions. That's my basic impression right now.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Strahm, this is the same question. Your biggest concern regarding globalization right now?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. I think the most stable framework is still the WTO system. In my opinion, and in the long run of experience, I think it's more stable than several bilateral or regional free trade agreements. More stable also than the European Union domestic framework, in my opinion. But my concern are three points. The first is the uncertainty of the US trade policy. What is only verbal trumpery, and what will be real protectionism? We do not yet know. My scenario, the most probable scenario, is not a strong protectionist rule of the United States in the sense of higher import tariffs and trade barriers, because the United States must quickly suffer also with caution measures. But my most probable scenario is a further devaluation of the US dollar. When I started 50 years ago, $1 was 4 francs 30 centimes. Now it's 90 or 1 franc. Because this has also, the devaluation of the dollar has also a protectionist effect. First, the exports are facilitated, it facilitates the exports of the United States. Secondly, it makes the importations more expensive, which is a sort of protection of the domestic production in the United States. And the third, and this is perhaps the most important, it brings a real foreign debt reduction of the foreign reduction of the United States. And my long-term experience is that we must await earlier or later a more strong devaluation of the dollar. A second one is uncertainty within the euro system. Everybody knows here that Italy, Spain, Greece, Portugal, perhaps also France, should be able to devaluate their currency. They are no longer competitive. They are not able to react vis-à-vis the Asian importations, but they cannot devaluate. And this means inside Europe, either we find the European Union finds a way to the fiscal union, or a continuation of the target equilibrium in the euro monetary system, or millions of people migrate to the north. And my third suspicion, and I think the most important tendency, is that migration is the killer of globalization. Not directly, but indirectly over political, democratic, psychological mechanism. I think this is the most explosive development we could heard us discuss a bit more about that, but migration and the political effects of migration kill also the global framework of internationalization and also free trade.
So thank you very much. So we're building up a range of things with the WTO, with uncertainty in the US, with the problems of the euro, migration. Kristyna Ters.
So thank you very much also for the invitation. So I just want to basically pick up where you stopped, because I see the largest concern, particularly to the global economy, so speaking about the US and the euro area, is that we are still in a very fragile environment. So we're still in the aftermath of the global crisis, so less in the US and more in the Eurozone, and which also concerns Switzerland a lot. So what I think is the largest threat to that is the uncertainty that you already mentioned. So we have the problem in the US that there is a very large interconnectedness between the US and Europe, which we have also seen in 2008 with this dramatic contagious spillover of the US financial market crisis. And in the US, even though we have a moderate growth environment, we have the problem that even before the election of Trump, we have already seen corporate revenues that were declining over the whole last year. We have also seen investments decreasing over the last 2 quarters, and I strongly believe that we will see the same again. On the other hand, we have the problem that due to these dramatic injections of money supply from the Federal Reserve since 2009, we have inflation that is almost at 3% in the US. We have a overvalued US dollar against the euro, what you have been already mentioning. So the Federal Reserve has the problem that they cannot further inject liquidity to devalue the dollar or to try to accelerate investments due to very high inflation. So in the medium term, they have to increase interest rates because in the medium term, inflation of 3% will only be possible when we have an oil price that is below $20 per barrel. So we might see, so my scenario, which is very highly probable, unfortunately, so due to this uncertainty that we have with the election of Donald Trump and also in the across Europe, with these political movements that we see, that we're going to have further decrease of investments, and with the interest rate hike in the US, it's going to further sluggish, so we're going to see a sluggish economy with high inflationary environments, and the worst case scenario will be that we're going to see a stagflation as in the 1970s.
Thank you. Dr. Lehmann, you spoke earlier about a range of issues that you feel are critical to globalization. We've had additional issues coming in, a lot of focus on currencies, on valuation, devaluation of currencies, and inflation, which limits governments' ability to actually develop policy. We also saw that within Europe, obviously within the Euro realm, that nations can't have their own valuation, devaluation policy because they're part of a single currency. How do these ideas connect to some of the things that you said before?
I think they very much connect. I think one of the problems that we're facing right now is we've got globalization with no global governance. So it's a bit of an anarchic environment. And I fully agree that the WTO is where it should be at. But it's not worth that. And I think this illustrates how, just to remind people, WTO was created in 1995. 1999 there was an attempt to launch a new round in Seattle, which failed because of the huge demonstrations, anti-globalization demonstrations. Then there was a meeting in Doha, 2001, where the new Doha development round was launched, partly because 9/11 had happened just a little bit before. I was not in Seattle, I was not in Doha, but I was in Cancun in 2003. It was the first ministerial WTO meeting I'd ever been to, and I was convinced it would fail. It was a Tower of Babel. So in fact, I wrote a piece afterwards saying that it reminded me there's an Italian author called Luigi Pirandello, wrote a play called Six Actors in Search of an Author. Basically, during plays, they know they're supposed to be on stage, but they don't know what their script is. They're going around, etc. That was Cancun. And I then addressed this to a number of people, including Pascal Lamy when he became Director General, said, it's not going to work, it's not going to work, it's not. Because there's no trust, there's no bonding, there's a mercantilistic attitude within a liberal system. And I think I agree that we have to rely on trying to go back on WTO, but a fortified WTO, and one that operates in a very different spirit than the one in which this I think is a huge challenge and important priority. So this is what the Avion Group is going to be prioritizing over the course of the next couple of years.
I think we've heard about the WTO a couple of times. I was also lucky enough several times to go to Geneva and speak to people there. And one of the things I found quite interesting was in the time frame you're speaking about. You would tell me that there was a time when everyone would be speaking, and then the Americans would walk into the room, and everyone would be quiet, and they would listen, and then after a bit of argument, they'd accept the American position. And then China said no, and India said no, and Brazil said we're with China and India. And it became a very different environment there, that there was no, perhaps dominant is the wrong word, but there was no power that could actually push through change. And as you said, then it became very much more mercantilist, or at least nationalist in its approach, that each country was fighting very much for something within the agenda that was specific to it, rather than the broader agenda. Is that fair? Or?
No, look, I think this is what took place. It was what scandalized me in Cancun, that you had the Americans, the Japanese, the Europeans, the Canadians came over there, and they were accustomed to agreeing and making the decisions, so-called quad. And then when the Brazilians and the Chinese and the Indians and whoever else started speaking up, who are these upstarts? What the hell do they think they're doing, etc. And I overheard conversations of some of the principal people there saying we've got to keep them in check. This is very far from the idea of the Doha development round. And I think now that it's a problem of leadership. So I was personally very much against TPP and TTIP. Not for the same reasons I hasten to add as Donald Trump. But I was against it because it was creating this discrimination. What we need is inclusivity. And also, for example, there was unfairness in it. So now we've no longer got TPP, we no longer have TTIP, and we've got CETA, but that's small beer. What have we got?
I'd like to come back to CPP afterwards. I noticed the head nodding here, and I think there may be some other comments that I'd like to pick up with the WTO, or we can take it on to other government structures as well. But these are the global government structures.
Absolutely. Since Seattle and Cancun, we had Bali. And the spirit of Bali led to an accord, which was quite a positive surprise. What happened is that they said, we put this very ambitious Doha round, the agenda aside, and we look, what can we conclude as a deal? And they concluded two main things. One is on trade facilitation. That means that although all over the world we have now rather low tariffs globally, the administrative burden is still there. I give you an example. In their harvest, it takes easily 1 month to get the custom clearance for one piece of metal, a machine part. I'm here in Olten, right? So this cannot be. So they said, okay, let's improve globally the systems to make it more transparent, to put it on e-government and so on. That was one I thought very important. And the other one was even more important politically. They said, we make an agreement and we stop subsidizing exports on agricultural goods, which was already once concluded at the end of the Uruguay round, but the northern countries did never deliver. So that was one of the reasons why many third world countries, poorer countries, said, you never delivered what you promised at the end of the Uruguay round. Now it's the time, and then we look after. Now, the interesting thing is in Bali, everyone said that are the two building blocks we want to go through now. There was one big country which was more and more getting isolated during the Bali process, and it was India, for the wrong reason. And they did a big party. The then Minister of Trade and Industry, Mr. Sharma, he was not really very credible in his arguments. He got by the hours more and more isolated. At the end, it was the President of Indonesia taking the phone of the Indian President, Mr. Singh at that time, saying, listen, your minister, he is doing crazy things. Just stop him. Stop him now. The world wants to move on in these two areas. And then Sharma was a bit convinced. Then it was Venezuela. Say, hold on, we have an issue. And at the end, even Cuba wanted to block. You know, we must have the agreements of all the governments on the WTO, including Cuba. And then the Americans moved in and said, okay, Cubans, this is not the moment to talk here on WTO. You agree here, and we sit together within the next 18 months. This was Obama direction, an executive order probably. So what we saw since then in Nairobi, they concluded the work on FTC, trade facilitation, and at the same time now the agricultural subsidies. So I have the idea that WTO is under pressure, but it starts now delivering smaller agreements, not the big ones anymore, and this might be a bit more pragmatic. And many countries now say, well, we have been criticizing WTO for good reasons, but we're still quite happy it's there. And I think very many governments start now supporting the idea to have a multilateral framework for the world trade system. And I also hear more and more also from government officials that they found out that today's world trade system reflects our economies now more than 30 years ago. So I think it's the time now to adapt to the existing world economy and take up many issues that have not been there when Uruguay round was concluded at the end of the year. I hope I wasn't too long.
Dr. Strahm is making some notes, I think he'd
Yes. What are your notes?
Only one difference. You said India blocked the Bali process for wrong reasons. This is the Economy Swiss view of the pharmaceutical industry, which wanted full access to the Indian pharmaceutical market. And I think it's justified that a country like India, with 1.4 billion people, more than half are very poor people, are protected also on the field of intellectual property. The Basel industry wanted access to India with the big and very expensive new products, and India did not want to accept it. And I think morally, but also economically, it is justified to have a certain protection on the field of intellectual property. 150 or 200 years ago, the German trade union, the German protectionism against the British was the Erziehungszoll-Argument. I don't know whether it exists an English expression, but the domestic, not permanent, but temporary protection of the growing domestic industry against a competitor from outside is also economically justified. That I wanted to see. But what the WTO is concerned, you know, the Uruguay round was under a very, perhaps now historically judged wrong start, because it did not take any consideration on the field of social standards and on the field of ecological standards. And I think this generation of diplomats and trade negotiators, they all they pay the price for not taking into the consideration, for instance, social standards, ecological standards. This is perhaps not true in Asia, but in Europe and in North America, we have also a strong resistance. We have not only India and some protectionists. We have a very strong resistance among the people, not only the workers, also the middle classes, because the free trade and the WTO framework has not considered these problems. And I think in the future, in my opinion, and I worked 50 years ago with UNCTAD, and I'm following half a century now the international trade. In my experience, there is in the future not a possibility to continue the liberalization without any framework on the social and ecological standard level. I think that this is my conclusion, and I think more and more, even the liberals, even in the institutions, this is taken into the consideration. That I wanted to add.
Actually, I very much like to say to myself that you talked about the idea that it's not just economic but moral. But it's not just economic. I'm okay. I have to walk down there afterwards. But it's good. We're fine. I'm going to jump in for a moment, then I'm going to go back to it. Okay. I was interested in this idea that we need to move beyond the economic arguments and bring in the moral argument. In Dr. Lehmann's presentation earlier, he brought up Adam Smith, and obviously when we think about Adam Smith and moral sentiments, it's the idea of actually sharing the benefits of growth. And it's clear there are significant parts of the population in developed countries that don't feel they've had a share, and there are whole nations who don't necessarily feel they've had a particular share. And globalization and global trade hasn't made everybody richer. It's had varying impacts in different places. And I really would like to go back down there. But I'd also like to pick up the second idea, the idea that liberalism, or at least trade liberalism, is perhaps not just an economic argument, it's also a political argument. That it's part of political economy, and you mentioned Germany, but Hamilton in the US put this policy forward even earlier, that the US needed to protect its young industries against increased competition from the UK until they were strong enough. South Korea developed that way, Japan developed that way. We have a long history of this. There's an economist whose name, Chun, his family name, but his first name slips my mind right now, originally from South Korea, now at Cambridge, who writes a lot about this. That the idea that the Washington Consensus, everybody has to open up, everyone has to liberalize. That's the dogma that the most developed countries are forcing on countries that are developing for the benefit of the most developed. So, a bit of a speech from myself, which I'm not supposed to do, but are we sharing the benefits? Are we sharing the benefits in a way which actually allows globalization to be sustainable? And I don't only mean green here. And if we're not, what do we need to do? Who would like to take the microphone?
You have it already. So I just want to say something to the before-mentioned topic about TTP and the WTO, because you mentioned there have been a lot of cons on the TTP framework, which I absolutely agree, but on the other hand, there have been also several cons, which haven't been mentioned yet. So you have been talking about environmental abuses and problematic human rights in certain countries and the production. And I think particularly TTP, well, there were agreements in that framework that well, would have been preventing certain environmental abuses, etc. So, and improvement of labor standards, which has not been in place yet in certain Asian regions. So I think that would have been definitely a pro. And following on to that, I strongly believe that one of the problems that we have in globalization, even though I'm a liberal, I believe that we have a strong problem that externalities or negative externalities are not priced into trade prices. So we pay a high price in certain regions, particularly on environmental abuses.
Just a couple of thoughts. This year, Switzerland used to be one of the poorest regions in Europe, just 200 years ago. We did not even have enough resources to build our trains. We had to import capital. So, with this export strategy of this country here, is a good example that when you have market access, fair market access, and the infrastructure that is needed, a good education, like here, then you're well done. The biggest problem today in globalization is that we have too many countries and too many parts of the population in these countries that have no access to the markets. Because either the markets are closed for them in areas where they could be a competitive exporter, or because they lack of education or infrastructure. This has nothing to do with any type of consensus, just basic economic reasoning. The other thing is where you have big problems of poverty. Look to the poorest 12 African countries and look to the bank accounts of the leadership of these poorest 12 countries. They have all been in power in average for 25 and more years and are among the 12 most richest men in Africa. So, to share benefits of globalization needs access to markets. And secondly, even with the access of markets, you must have a good governance in these countries. That's really basic, and that's where we have to work far more on it. That's my basic conviction as a liberal economist.
In this last point, I fully agree. You need stable conditions and protection also for property, and so that is, we agree. But Mr. Chairman, you asked who are the losers or the winners? Are we winners? Who are the winners? Switzerland surely is a winner of the international trade and international global economy. Not only Switzerland, also Germany, Austria, and so on. But perhaps we have here a difference. Switzerland is not only rich because of its multinational corporations. And Switzerland is not only rich because of the banks. At the moment, because when I travel around the world, we are the bankers. Every Swiss is the banker. At the moment, the Swiss banking is contributing 7% to the gross national product. 2/3 of our workforce, employees, are in small and medium industries. 99.7% of the corporations are small corporations, below 250 people. I think we are rich also because of our system of education, the skilled workforce, also the vocational education and training. You don't need, you cannot become a rich country if you have only a few corporations which are rich. You need a very broad race of productivity, and this depends on the educational system. I think economic policy is also policy of education, and policy of education is also economic policy. That I think you agree. But I come back to the winners. Switzerland is a winner, but we have also losers inside Switzerland. Agriculture, for instance, that we can pay. We are the country perhaps with the highest degree of protectionism of agriculture. You see it every day in the restaurant. But also Germany is a winner, Austria, the Scandinavian countries, and all these countries, they do not have only universities but also a skilled workforce. And Southern Europe does not have. In Italy, France, they have more engineers than Switzerland, but they do not have a skilled workforce which was being able to raise the productivity against the Asian competition. And this, I think, is also one of my conclusions. Is you need in the globalization a speedy diffusion of new technologies, and also diffusion of new processes in order to raise productivity. And I think the key question will be in the future the technological education of the skilled workforce. I have been in China in 1975 when Mao lived, but I have been last year in a master education in Chinese law of economic law. And what I learned last year, the Chinese government is raising productivity because they say in the long term we cannot compete against our competitors, Burma, Myanmar, Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, and that's why this school also has now a contract with the Chinese government to learn more about the Swiss vocational educational system. And I think this is the key. If a country wants to raise productivity in order to maintain competition, international competition, they need more diffusion of new technologies. And you cannot wait until the young students come from the universities with 24 or 25 years. You need also a system of further education of people who are 30, 35 or 45 years old. Because the new technologies are diffused so strong, so quickly. You need a lifelong learning also in technology. I wanted to explain, perhaps also the friends from abroad, about a bit our key question of productivity and richness in Switzerland. But this is also true for Germany, from Austria, from Holland, Denmark. These 5 countries are the countries who have still a vocational education and training system, a dual system, compared with other Southern European countries which do not have.
I think indirectly and implicitly you explained why India is lagging behind. And India is a very good example of the best engineers in the world, the most brilliant, they succeed internationally all over Silicon Valley. But the country's got very, very poor prospects because it lacks basic education. And I'm very skeptical. I don't know what the conclusions will be. Because there was a project in India, right? Yeah. I don't know what the conclusions were. Education, infrastructure, opportunity. These are lacking. I might have said in the Nobel Prize when I said that India cannot be considered really a democracy because of lack of education. Education is the essential key. So you have, as I say, some of the most brilliant minds, which go that we've been to India will know, the huge problems at the base, lack of literacy, lack of basic education, lack of infrastructure, etc. And until and unless this takes place, I don't think those prospects in India, you're absolutely right. On the other hand, you don't have a project in South Korea. I go to various places in the world, including London, Africa, and I say study the South Korean model of economic development. Because there you had education, there you had infrastructure, and there you had protectionism. It was outward-looking protectionism. So how do we export, learn, and transfer technology, learning patterns? And that's, I think, the learning part is also absolutely essential to this. So it's learning not just through life, but learning what's happening outside. I think one of the things that's very interesting is South Korea Korea was known as the Herbert Kingdom, very inward-looking. In the course of this industrialization process, became very outward-looking and had careers all over the place, studying, getting PhDs at MIT and so on and so forth, coming back, had a number of think tanks, etc. And I must say that it's been extremely impressive, the developments that have taken place. And now they've got to a stage also, so when I was there first in 1967, when Koreans greeted each other was, "Have you eaten today?" They were so poor that they were. It's one of the very few countries that has escaped the middle income trap to a high income country. It's having its problems currently. Currently there's few political problems, social problems, which I think they'll get over. But it really is a very, very interesting case study of industrialization, economic development, economic growth, and social development also.
As you have been asking who were the winners and losers of the overall globalization, I would absolutely agree with you that Switzerland is also one of the winners. However, I would like to more specify about the situation in Switzerland, which you very probably more of a higher expertise than I do. But what is interesting in Switzerland is that the downturn since 2009 in Switzerland on export has been much more moderate than in other countries, because Switzerland also has a very high degree of diversification among countries where we export to. So Switzerland is also among one of the very few countries that has a positive trade balance with China. So we have much more diversified exports into to Asian countries. Furthermore, Switzerland has a high degree of exports in products or goods that are not subject to cyclical demands. So it's just like pharmaceuticals or high precision machinery. So I think Switzerland is doing a very good job with respect to maintaining a very good human labor with a high specialization, as you mentioned that already. But on the other hand, it showed us as well that we have to reduce the interconnectedness, so from with a high specific risk exposed to one specific country. Because what is the case in Germany, what you just said before, so Germany is also one of the winners of globalization. However, Germany has the problem that they have a much higher bulk risk when it comes to exports, okay, so particularly in the Asian countries. So I think they have a high exposure to China. However, the thing is, you mentioned, well, we are winners, so we have high positive current accounts.
But we have losers too, inside.
Yes, that is absolutely true, but what I want to more look at from a meta level is that even though we have positive foreign wealth, so the argument from some economists is that, well, as our demography is changing, so our people are getting older, so that we are able to consume more in the future because of our positive net foreign wealth. However, the problem is that we have also very high risk with respect to that. And it was also interesting that last year the German Bundesbank says that in Germany labor, so salaries should be increased due to the fact that they have a very high exposure to the export industry. And by increasing salary, they want to basically increase the level of consumption, okay, so that the GDP is not only highly depending on the exporting industry. Okay, so there could be also a negative aspect.
So again, we've touched on a number of issues here. Very soon I'm going to start taking questions from the audience. But I mean, we started off talking about the kind of global governance and the WTO, and we said a few words about that. We kind of then moved on through a fairly complex route, but started to think about some of the winners and losers, and seeing that both within countries and between countries, there are certain winners and losers. That within countries there needs to be governance. You gave us the idea that the 12 poorest countries all have very good governance. It's been mentioned that Switzerland, for example, is a great winner, and if you look at the winners, they do tend to be small as well, quite often. They tend to be not have huge internal markets, so they had to expand, or at least the most interconnected countries. They tend to, not all, but many of them were already rich by the mid-1990s. Many of them, well, we can disagree afterwards. They have specialized industries, they have value-added products, they have solid education systems, so they can actually benefit from added value. But we also see even within those countries, there are some issues. We have the idea that a South Korean model, for example, started off with native industry protection until its industries were strong enough to compete. I mean, I would argue that China, in a different way, is doing that today. There's still preferential treatment for Chinese companies in China, increasingly so. So there are things that make things more difficult. I think in the West, we also make things more difficult for other countries coming in, unless they're similar countries, sometimes. I come originally from the UK, and it's one of the more open economies. I think the UK is willing to sell pretty much anything apart from the Queen at the moment. But they haven't fixed the price there, actually, so I guess she's an externality. We talked a little bit about the middle income trap, and how those countries who do develop get caught in that trap between, on one side, low-cost producers, on the other side, people who are already more advanced, how they might get through that. And one of the words is always innovation. And I've heard the word so often recently that I don't really understand what it means anymore. It seems to be almost anything, which is to do with change. But what is certainly at the heart of it is to do with education. So it's to having a system within the country that invests in the future capabilities of that country. Now, you disagreed completely with me just a moment ago, so I can't really go out to the audience without giving you a chance to say why I was wrong.
For me, the fascinating point is the following. We had 60, 70 years ago a country like Argentina, which was in the personal income per head among the 5 richest countries in the world. And we had extremely poor countries like Chinese Taipei, like South Korea. And look where they are now. It was North Korea 50 years ago that was much richer than South Korea. Taiwan, or Chinese Taipei, was a rural area with some fishes and some rice fields and nothing else compared to today. So what we see is those countries that were able to do something, also to have a constant flow of structural reforms in education, infrastructure, and building up businesses, they succeeded. And those who just sat around or were unable to go into structural reform did not have a share of the gains in the economic activity. Look to the Middle East, look to Maghreb, where this did not happen. And they did not have that progress compared to others. So for me, it's one of the leading or best examples we just saw over the last 6 decades, the payoff you get from good structural reforms each time, each year, when the governance leads to the constant adaptation of the needs. That's my main point. In the dynamics, for me it's absolutely fascinating. I keep telling when I'm asked, if a country like Switzerland can do it over 150 years, everyone can do it.
I mean, I think to some we don't disagree as much as I thought we did. I mean, my time scale was 20 years, and your time scale is somewhat longer. And some of the countries you talked about, like Chinese Taipei, maybe in that simpler time before, if I can take your idea, simpler time before 1989. There were reasons that they got.
Time was never simple.
we keep, that's
I'm not going to argue with you. I'm going to leave it to the man who said it earlier. But maybe in a simpler time, those countries had certain benefits from having a big partner who wanted to support them very significantly.
No, I know Taiwan relatively well. Again, I went there 50 years ago. As you say, it was rural. In fact, the biggest economic activity was being a base for Western recuperation of American soldiers for the war in Vietnam. So it was a bit of a brothel, put it mildly. And it was very difficult to believe that this country would rise the way it has. I think it's true that, for example, it is an uncontestable fact, not an alternative fact, an uncontestable fact, that Taiwan benefited greatly from American aid. But so did a lot of other countries. It's what you do with it. And you know, they poured all this into education. They send out, like with the South Koreans, they send out Taiwanese to study abroad, to learn the best knowledge, etc. I remember when I was hanging around in Boston in the 1970s, 1980s, people said that MIT stood for Made in Taiwan, because a number of Taiwanese were studying there. So I think it's, of course you need lucky breaks, of course you need positive circumstances, but it's what you do with it. And I again admire, having seen where Taiwan came from, I admire what they've achieved quite significantly gone with South Koreans. The road to growth is not obvious, but there are lessons to be learned. There are certain things. Again, just very briefly, one of the countries I visit quite frequently now is Madagascar, which is a case study in disaster. And the first time I went there, they asked me to give a presentation, I came up with the 10 Commandments. And the first commandment was, I was speaking in French, I said, surtout faites pas de conneries. Above all, avoid making stupid mistakes. That's not quite a translation, but anyway. And if you take South Korea, countries like that, look what they did right. Take a country like Madagascar, what they're doing wrong. And they did wrong, and they did wrong, and nationalized it, they did that, etc., based on theories. I think one of the things that struck me about the countries that succeed is they're driven by pragmatism, not idealism. So Mao's China was a disaster because it was very ideological. Deng Xiaoping comes along and says it doesn't matter whether the cat's black or white, as long as the cat is white, it's a good cat. Go across the river by feeding the stones. And this, I think, is very important to have a pragmatic approach. And to invest in infrastructure, invest in technology, invest in people. And this is what the Africans are failing to do, what Brazil failed to do, what Argentina failed to do. And you say, you're right to say that one of the stories that's very interesting is the rise of South Korea, the rise of Taiwan, the collapse of Argentina, which were one of the richest countries in the world.
Absolutely. We're going to open up to questions from the audience. I think there are a couple of people around with microphones or so. So who has questions? Where's the first? The first question is right down the front here. Oh, actually, it's a microphone.
Thank you very much for the very interesting discussion. We have a lot of many interesting insights. I would like to ask, we hear a lot about America, we hear a lot about India, China, and the Asian region. I'm wondering what's the position of Europe in the 21st century if the narrative is written in Asia?
Are you asking anyone in particular or is it general?
Whoever feels addressed.
Who feels addressed about the future of Europe in an Asia-driven world?
What strikes me when I go a lot to that part of the world. I go very often to East Asia, South Asia. Increasingly, and just to give you an illustration, I was at a meeting in Astana in Kazakhstan, on Eurasia. There were delegations from pretty much all over the place. Very few Europeans. Europe is not a subject of discussion. We're being marginalized. We're a big market. We produce good wine, good cheese, and we have interesting tourist destinations, and we have nice museums. But with the exception of Germany, again, Germany would have to be taken out. But otherwise, particularly the whole game of geoeconomics, geopolitics, geopolitical features, I think that Europe, in so many respects, is having difficulty. It's very much inward looking. It's very much, it should be much more outward looking, adjust to these new age environments. And as Germany to a certain extent is doing, I mean, it's coming in ambivalence to a certain extent. But the future is not in Europe.
Is Europe inward looking because it's so engrossed with its own problems?
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. Again, I'm French, we all have our crosses to bear. And I listen to all the debates about, they're totally name-pleasing. It's very little, or when it's about the outside world, it's very negative. Come on, I tell you, Shima, how these thoughts, he's from this, that, the other thing. We need a European Renaissance. This is one of the reasons why this book that I recommended to you, the New Silk Road, read it. It's fascinating. It shows to what extent Europe is trying to depend on learning from the East, such a long period of its history. So we have to decrease Eurocentrism and learn the country, which is why projects like this are very good. I think Europeans are too ignorant. I do just add one last point here. At IMD we have executives from all over the world, but mainly Europeans. And when I come and teach in sessions on globalization, or on Asia, for example, I give the hated, called basic literacy tests. These are executives in their 40s, rising, etc. The ignorance of the rest of the world is just hallucinating. They just don't know. And I think it's because we still have this atavistic attitude that we're the center of the universe. We're not. But we can have a perfectly good future as long as we adjust to the changes that are taking place. And when I showed you the demographics, 1900 we were a quarter of the world's population, now we're 7%. That includes Russia and Turkey and Switzerland.
I'm sure there are other people who'd like to say something about the future of Europe.
Thank you. Good question. In Europe, we have this bit that trends to be too pessimistic. If we were American, we would say, now we have this crisis since almost 10 years, we're fed up with the crisis, now just do that's a different attitude. And I'm quite optimistic. First of all, Europe compared to other regions in the world, we are having stable societies compared to others. We have more inclusive societies, we have social systems that are under heavy stress now, but compared to other regions of the world, they still work. We are democracies. We still have widespread high average income, also in Southern Europe. Now the question is, what do we do now with this, let's say, endowment? If we do what Mr. Strahm said, if we look after our competitiveness, if we do structural reforms in educational systems, for example, in Switzerland we have at least 500,000 people are analphabets. For me this is a social catastrophe, personally. It cannot be that in the richest country in the world, the most competitive country in the world by all numbers, we have 500,000 citizens here among us who are not able to read a book. This type of thing is for me social policy to correct that. In other areas, it was mentioned before, in southern parts of Europe, we have a political leadership which is unable to do reforms quickly. The reform job is always bloody. Look at the IMF books, look at the papers, it always hurts. But if you don't do the structural reforms, it hurts even more. You bring your societies to the edge. But basically, I'm quite convinced that Europe, if we do the right things, will have a very, very good position, also based on innovation, on our societies and new technologies and so on. Don't underestimate the potential which is still here in Europe. Most of the regions of the world just copied the European model in how to do science, how to develop technologies. They have now a lot of success. For example, the reform program of Deng Xiaoping, who was one of his advisors, he was a Swiss, he was Professor Linde, who was member of his reform commission in the early 80s. So we are basically much more better positioned, I would think, so don't be over pessimistic.
I unfortunately have to be a little bit pessimistic because I certainly believe that when talking about the future of Europe, it is very uncertain what we're going to see in the very recent future.
You mean the institution?
I'm particularly talking about the political outcome that we might see soon, and also whether countries going to be in favor or not to globalization. Because what we currently see in Europe as well as in the US is more a trend towards anti-globalization, whereas I just want to take out also the former communist countries, which are more supportive still to globalization. But what I think we see in Europe is increasing pessimism due to the uncertainty that we have. So it's also the case that, well, it was argued by economists that this is particularly due to the typical Rust Belt voters, so blue-collar, unskilled people. However, we also see in certain countries that this is not the case, that it has also already taken over onto the middle class. So because we have a continuing decrease in the wealth of the middle class, so they also become dramatically more pessimistic in certain countries, and also influenced by missing reforms also from labor markets in certain countries, of course. And I also see further problems because you just mentioned, well, our social systems in certain countries are under stress. Middle class has to pay higher taxes ongoingly, and we're also going to see, as you mentioned in your speech before, which I absolutely agree with you, that the migration that we see is just the beginning. So we're just going to see an enforcement of several negative trends, which are going to promote populism across Europe.
I think both are right. It depends what you need. You need to look to Europe, or what glasses you need. We have a stable continent, we have traditions, we have a stable democracy, stable states. Europe as a whole has a good trade balance sheet as a whole, but we have very big disparities inside. But you are right, the institutions to manage Europe as a continent are weak and are in a crisis. But this is not a contradiction. We have both. We have both in the continent, and it depends about a little how you judge the continent. But for me, it's clear we have a continent of 500 million people, small continent. If compared with Asia, I think the game will play in Asia. The game will play in Asia. And for me, it was very impressive to see that the Chinese government, the Xi Jinping government, is now making a full opening strategy towards Europe. With the Silk Road, with opening, they need 60 different bilateral agreements to construct the Silk Road. They have the money, they can do it. And they, before the Trump election, their analysis was, we cannot work in the long term together with the United States. But before, it was last summer, the people in Beijing, they announced that America will become protectionist, independent of the elections. But Europe, also the Middle Asia, also Africa, what are the raw materials are concerned, they have a very long-term strategy. And what was very impressive, you know, I have been a long time in the Swiss Parliament. We count 4 years. Then there are elections, changes of government. The Chinese and other nations Asian governments, they count 99 years. A friend of mine, Mali Samstadt, some know her, has been a director of the Swiss National Bank. They worked for the Bank for International Settlements in Hong Kong. They had also contact with the Chinese officials, although with the currency strategy of the Bank of China and so on. So she said, for me as a European, the most impressive conclusion is they count with 99 years. And this, I think we should calculate also. In this respect, we should define in Europe a new policy, and we have the strengths, you are right, but we have the weak institutions, and you are right too. That's why I say both are a bit right.
We'll come back to the. I think one of the things about Europe is we shouldn't also fall into some of the mistakes that, for example, my original country, the United Kingdom, fell into, where ideological dogma took over from common sense. So whether it was in the 1980s, where all representation for workers had to be smashed, and which of course helped Deng Xiaoping take a great opportunity, because both the US and the UK decided they wanted to offshore an enormous amount to smash as they put it at the time, to improve the labour conditions. But it actually meant destroying any strength for unions and workers at the time. Obviously then the structural changes, closing the steel industry, closing the coal industry, they're necessary, but they were handled extremely badly. There are people in cities like Stoke, which will have a vote, I think, this week, next week. Sometimes there are 3 generations of families of 3 generations that have never had a job. There's not proper investment in education, the schools don't work. And these are the people that voted for Brexit. And when you talk about the Rust Belt question, of course, there are other people who are starting to see maybe it's not such a bad thing to be more protectionist. But there are a lot of people there who feel massively excluded in their own countries because their own governments haven't invested. And that's why I think it's so important that both gentlemen said to invest in people. I mean, having come to Switzerland, one of the things I find remarkable here is the effort that's put into education, the commitment that people have to actually being involved in decision making and politics at a local level. The kind of thing that I didn't recognise in that other country. In the UK, I just didn't recognise it. So, to come back to the question about the future of Europe, Europe has a future, but it only has a future, or its future is best if it focuses on highly educated workforce who are then productive. China wants to raise its productivity, I think it's to $13,000 per hour, so per person per hour, which is, will be way below if it was Switzerland. It invests in research and development so that it has technologies that it can share and it's willing to share them. And it works with developing countries so that it has access to a balance between a degree of stability and the potential that comes from growth. But we can't just look inwards, and we certainly can't have labour reforms that leave half of the population with no hope and no access to the riches that you can get from trade. But I'm supposed to be moderating, not politically ranting. There's a question back there.
Hi everybody. My question goes to Professor Kristyna Ters. Since I'm interested in the financial aspect of globalization, we know that amongst others, highly complicated derivatives like CDOs, CDS, caused or provoked the financial crisis we had, and as a result, great regulations, pressure from governments and regulations towards companies and those highly complicated derivatives and trade. My question is, do you think there is an impact concerning those regulations and those highly complicated derivatives considering globalization?
Thank you very much. Well, I think CDS, so Well, let me first make a distinction between what derivatives you have been talking about. So I think the major market we should be talking about are credit default swaps. So credit default swaps, shortly for those who are not too deep into finance, so are basically a insurance contract that you can buy on a potential default of a reference entity. What we have been seeing is a lot of speculation on potential defaults during the euro sovereign debt crisis, so hedge funds speculating on a default of Greece, for example, and intensifying the sovereign debt crisis because of that. So what happens then during the crisis is that Merkel, Sarkozy addressed this question openly in a letter to the European Commission and said, well, maybe we should introduce a ban on these speculations, which was also introduced in 2011. So in the Eurozone, we have a ban on speculative trading with these credit default swaps. Because what we have seen, well, unfortunately, there's still very few empirical research on that, but what we have seen so far is that there has been indeed intensification of the crisis because of these speculations through the derivatives markets. What is also the case is that credit default swaps, so trading over credit default swaps, increases the interconnectedness through financial markets across countries. So when we see a downturn in the US, for example, after the Chapter 11 filing of Lehman in 2009, so that it immediately spilled over into Europe. So we have empirical evidence that this happens within 2.5 to 3 hours. So we see a very high interconnectedness through financial markets. However, I wouldn't say that financial markets are the main reason, or derivatives are the main reason for interconnectedness across the globe, so globalization as you were referencing to. But we have this interconnectedness particularly through trade linkages, so through the real economy. However, this derivatives, so trading with these derivatives on financial markets, just accelerates everything, okay, and intensifies certain movements in financial markets.
Would you like to add anything to the answer?
Well, you are the specialist in finance, but after your long explanations, I do not know what is your opinion towards speculation and the CDOs and so on. I do not understand what is your opinion. My experience, historically found, is speculation is destabilizing the world economy, is also destabilizing politically the political framework. It was in the 1930s with all these followings. We had it by 2008 and the following, and many of the European problems, but also perhaps also the American problems, all these are also a consequence of the destabilizing forces of the financial markets. And that's why I think in the interest of the global economy, but the whole economy, the macroeconomics, in the interest is a strong worldwide ruling of the financial markets. I do not think that the next crisis will be the same. We do not know where it will come. But all these tendencies of deregulation, we hear now, it is only announced, it is not executed in the United States, will have harm to the globalization process in the long term. You do not agree, but I have a rather clear opinion in this.
Kristyna, if place I want to know that. You don't have to stop me, but I'd also like to say something.
Yes, let me just answer your question with what exactly my opinion is. So, I would strongly disagree, as what you said, that speculation destabilizes certain countries. I would rather say, yes, I would rather say that, for example, let's look at Greece. So Greece even acknowledged that they have been fabricating the official debt statistics, and in the aftermath of that, obviously speculation picked up. However, the true problem was that Greece accumulated a lot of debt. Okay, so speculation just intensifies the problem. However, pure speculation cannot be the only reason for destabilization.
Is the fault that Greece accumulated a lot of debt because Greek people somehow have bad character, or is it a lot of banks who are speculating and throwing money at them at absurd interest rates?
Well, I think that would be going too deep. Well, the Greek banks were obviously bailed out by Germany predominantly, so because there have been a lot of interlinkages between German banks and Greek banks, so across all GIPS countries. However, it is also true that Greece has been very loose, so Greek banks have been very loose on giving out loans, also to private people. So they were having a lot of leverage on private households as well. So I think the problem was manifold, but what I want to say is that over-regulation cannot be the solution as well, because over-regulation, and we see that empirically over decades now, that over-regulation leads also to a decrease in overall growth, because we cannot over-regulate financial markets. We have the problem that also from a monetary policy viewpoint, that monetary policy should be paying more attention, not try to taper the very dramatic money supply that we have now in the Eurozone, also in Switzerland, and in the US just started tapering already, so decreasing the high amount of money that is circulating. However, in the US, we definitely have the problem that, as before 2008, we have a dramatic amount of, again, mortgage-backed securities, also leveraged mortgage-backed securities. We have a higher amount of structured student loans, etc. So everything that we have been seeing before 2008, and there I would agree with you that this area must need to be regulated more in depth.
Okay, maybe just a minute or so, and then we're going to go to the next question.
When it came to CSCO market, just one minute. The volume before the crash in the United States was 35,000 billion US dollars. And the regulator in the United States was asked, what do you do about it? And the Security Exchange Commission in the United States replied, this is not our job, because they are not traded on the stock market. Now, it is quite easy ex post to find out that the hedge effectiveness of most of these instruments did not work out because the price movements were positively correlated. And under such conditions, if you correlate positively, you have not a hedge effectiveness, so you basically increased the risk through these instruments. It's really, really silly what happened there. No one looked it up. Probably the Bank for International Settlement had some clues. But that's the story. I remember in my former life, I looked after valuation systems for reporting companies. And being rather conservative here in Switzerland, we had a lot of problem with what's called in the 90s the fair value, the fair valuation to markets, market values. And we found out that in the financial industries, I was on the industry side, in the financial markets, they started to calculate it, fair value prices in the books. And we kept asking, listen, guys, why do you do so? and the market prices we can observe are not sufficiently reliable. So that's where, you know, the thing starts. When you go into the history of the recent crash, you find really absolutely crazy stories. I could go on for until after lunch. I stop here because you said 2 minutes.
I think we're kind of getting into fairly arcane worlds now. Maybe we need to see if there's another question, which brings us. Yeah. So who else has a question? One over here. There's one right at the front. So let's.
I think I got a more responsible question. It's about the energy turnaround. When we're talking about globalization, you're considering developed countries and poor countries. What do you think, what impact does the energy transition or energy turnaround does have on the globalization? And do you see any difficulties to manage that, since we have poor and more developed countries? And I think the more developed countries are more responsible for that.
The energy turnaround. Tell us what you mean by energy.
Energiewende. In general. Exactly.
Energiewende. Energy transition. Transition from.
Should I repeat the question?
So what is the impact of the transition from fossil fuels to more sustainable fuels going to have? And the second part of your question again?
It was that more developed countries, since they have, in my point of view, they're more responsible for that topic. They have the better sources to manage that. What impact does it have for the other countries?
Okay. I'm going to paraphrase your question. I'm probably going to lose a tiny bit of it, but we'll get back to it. So we're in the context of this change towards sustainable energies. And I think within the question there's a point about the responsibilities of the richer countries in the argument that they've used and created more problems in the past, but also the opportunities. I think that certainly goes beyond the ones. Who would like to go first? I see various hands.
Okay. I only can try to answer with one sentence. We have.
I think it's an important topic, so we should.
In Switzerland, in Germany, in the Northern Europe, we have less importations of energy, fossils, uran, and so on, but more domestic value added for technological investments. You see it in Germany, we see it also in Switzerland. We have a location in May. The main argumentation for this Energiewende, change of energy system, is make more in Switzerland, more places, workplaces, more technology in Switzerland instead of importations. That is, but this is also, you can see the statistics in Germany. The consequences in the countries delivering the industry, the oil and the gas and the uran will be, there will be a more stronger equilibrium between the rich, developed countries and these delivery countries. But I think this will be the consequence. And that's also because we have more value added, domestic value added, this Energiewende, change of energy system, is also accepted also in the democratic process, because you have so much winners, even in Switzerland, that the consequence will be it is accepted.
Jean-Pierre, would you like to?
Of course it's an important question. It's a very important question, but there's no answer. You know, you come back to what my VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. I was involved in a project a few years ago where there was the chief economist of Shell who participated. And this was a project that we were looking at scenarios for 2025 or whatever. It was in about 25. And we forecasted that the price of oil would go to $200. We were wrong. And I obviously you're going to, the impact of globalization are not absolutely certain. And as pointed out, there's going to be the countries that benefit are the exporting countries, the countries that suffer are the importing countries. The question of your responsibilities, your issue about responsibilities of the rich world, I think we should be doing much more towards technology transfer. One of the things that I find very difficult as a Westerner is our proclivity to preach. So we tell countries what they should do, not what we did. So, we should want to try to get as much as possible a safer environment, and then we should transfer asset technology and aid for those countries that are still dependent on relatively crude means of energy. This goes back to the whole issue of global governance. But you're right, it's an absolutely key question, but it's one that is in a state of complete, it's part of the confusion we're in right now. I was mentioned I was in Astana. Anybody been to Astana? It's new capital of Kazakhstan. It's absolutely amazing. It was built with the money when the price of oil was over here. So it's absolutely outlandish. Now there's difficulty in sustaining that. So obviously there's again the volatilities that we're talking about. I told you there's no answer.
But when you have no answers, then it's a good reason to keep on questioning. Why don't we have the answers? And it's up to you, to the next generation, to find out the right answers and to do the right thing. I'm quite convinced that all over the world we will see more investment into clean tech energy. If it's in India or in China, they will not be able to produce the same level of energy consumption as we have currently if they want to survive. They need better technologies, far better technologies, and in many areas you see it was China saying we accept the Paris Agreement on climate improvement. It was China, very early saying. Then Obama came in and then the Europeans. There is a commitment today to do something on it. I'm quite convinced that you will see the technology that it is needed to get there. Right now, as you just mentioned, the technology is not yet here. We see potentials in the technology era, and I'm quite optimistic that we get there, but it will need more education and far more investment in these new technologies. But I'm quite optimistic. I'm a big fan of clean tech. I live opposite TESM in Neuchâtel, so across the lake, and it's outstanding also in Switzerland, in our high-tech schools, what the basic research is delivering already now. But right now it's not yet sufficiently efficient. We need some more cornerstones here. But we will be there probably here in Switzerland about 10 to 15 years to have the technology. Right now we don't have it. When you look at the example in Germany, yes, they invested a lot in clean tech energy, fine. They also produce a lot of CO2 because the other 90% of energy they produce now through the firing of brown coal, which is probably the worst technology can produce energy with. Thank you.
Well, I'm absolutely no expert on energy and new energy, so I want to refrain from a comment. However, what I want to say is that, again, talking about negative externalities, because that's what pollution is all about, in the globalization context, that we should try, particularly with the future trade agreements, enforce much more minimum standards in environmental care and also labor standards, human rights standards, etc. Because I honestly believe that overall production costs and exporting costs are way too low for and don't account for the negative externalities, and it should be more enforced also by the end consumer. And I believe that also in Europe we're getting more aware of these negative externalities, and it starts to slightly modify.
Maybe if I can add something, if you look at some of the countries that you've been looking at this week,
And I don't have all the numbers in my head right now for different things, but India is going to more or less double its renewables. I think it was, you'll know these numbers better than I do. I think solar was going to go from 100 to 175 kilowatts, and various other things. There's clearly a push there. There's clearly a commitment and a perceived need from the Indian government. We heard about, in a number of ASEAN countries, the focus on the need to access different kinds of power. You can't just continue using oil and coal, etc. China is clearly pushing very, very hard and very fast. And if I can say the word extra about China, it's not just that it has some sort of idea that it's a good thing to have sustainable energy. It's also a genuine fear that the environmental problems that it has right now and lack of access to energy can lead to instability, and that could be a risk to the future of the party and the future of the state. And so these things link together in a very concrete way. They also link together with questions like migration. I mean, if you can't get energy out to the countryside, then why are you surprised when people come from the countryside to the cities? So there's, I mean, as I said, it's an incredibly important question, and it's a complex question. There's no single answer. Now, obviously, you're probably going to think that then we can say, oh, and I do love this word trumpery. I'm going to borrow that one, I think. But you start maybe think about trumpery. I mean, he turns up and the people he puts in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency, I mean, that choice can only be there to destroy the agency. I mean, he's put someone who doesn't, he keeps arguing that he doesn't believe in global warming, he wants to dig up the Arctic, or whatever he wants to do. Even him, oh, by the way, the man who takes people to court because there are wind farms which destroy the view from his golf course, is a remarkable gentleman. Even he wants, this week, suggested that the US should invest more in solar, but only in Arizona. It's very sunny in Arizona. But even he is not completely against sustainable energy. He's just also very much for digging up parts of the environment that maybe should be left as they are. So yeah, I mean, there are very, very many things going on, and it is it's going to be one of the changes that's going to, apart from Kristyna, we're all slightly older than you. So maybe in your generation it's going to be one of the really big challenges. And I think I was in various presentations this week, and there were lots of people talking about this topic. There was another question. It was right here. I'm getting a microphone for you.
I would like to ask you something about global inequality. So, on one hand, we have more digitalization, and we need less and less skilled, low-skilled labor force. And on the other hand, we have an exponential growth in population. And how do you think we can solve the problem of global wealth and income inequality?
Before we start to answer this, I've just been given a signal. This is the last question. So this is a chance to connect things to it as well. How are we going to solve it? It's a nice, easy question at the end, isn't it? How are we going to solve global inequality? Who would like to have the unenviable task of being first to attack this question?
I think that's the most crucial question in my viewpoint today. And inequality is also from a European perspective the main reason, well, this perceived inequality that people in certain countries have that might change the European or certain countries' viewpoints towards globalization. I think the largest benefits are in emerging economies, whereas the largest benefit is always initially. However, what you already mentioned is that we do have the problem that certain emerging economies don't invest. So when they benefit from globalization, they don't invest in education, for example, or they don't increase salaries in order to improve life standards. Also, we have the problem that, for example, labor standards are not enforced in certain countries. So that is definitely a very big issue, which on one hand, due to this, in some country, moderate improvement of people's life leads still to a dramatic population growth. Also, there are benefits of, for example, in emerging economies that have access to globalization. So, for example, life expectancy has been growing. Child mortality has been reduced by factor 3, for example, compared to countries that don't have access to emerging economies that don't are part of globalization. However, we have definitely a problem with overpopulation, so the negative externality, which will again lead to further migration from certain countries when those countries don't invest in education or don't invest in infrastructure.
Yeah, again, an easy question, which there's, no, there has to be, it's the same thing, that there's a Damocles sword over there. As I suggested in my presentation, unless we address this issue of inequality, I think the future is extremely bleak. And I myself would find myself very much in sympathy with those throwing the blood, throwing the bricks. And I think the problem is not inequality so much, but perception just based on injustice. That there are barriers to succeed. And this is where I think certain countries can look at what's been the social mobility. Again, I'm going to make a China-India comparison. I have a very, very good Indian friend called Paladi Iyer, who wrote a book on China called Smoke and Mirrors. She was 7 years correspondent in China. She's Indian, speaks Chinese and so on. She says in the course of the book, she was very often asked, who would you rather be, Indian or Chinese? She said, I always replied, if I were from an upper income family, which she is, I would prefer to be Indian. All the freedoms, etc. But I would prefer to be Chinese. There's been much more social mobility in China. There is inequality, there's huge inequality problems. But at least there's some movement that's taking place. But I think, again, as has been stressed, there has to be education, including for, because a lot of the problems of inequality are not due to globalization and due to technologies. It's just a matter of fact, again, as I said, I very much doubt that Mr. Modi's Make in India campaign will succeed, partly because of the problems of inequality, of lack of education, basic skills, but also because globalization, I think somebody mentioned this, it's going to have a huge impact on the future of work, etc. So you have to look after people that have permanent lifetime education, as I think you pointed out, training and to adapt to new skills, etc. In the end, you also have to make things easier in terms of setting up businesses, access to finance and so on and so forth. One of the problems again in India, the reason that there's such a huge informal economy, is because there's so many formal barriers. So it has to be coordinated. But as I said, I think this is something which the Damocles sword is there. It is there for energy and other things. Also, but what kind of society do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a society where there's injustice, inequality, or do you want to live in a society where there's a certain amount of mobility, movement, and hope? And this is where I think the word is extremely important. If there's no hope for future, there's no hope. So there has to be some sort of sense of hope. So inclusive growth, education, administrative issues, etc. And these have to be urgently addressed.
Dr. Strahm.
I cannot give an answer when we speak about the disparities in the global context. What happens with Africa and so on. I have been a Diemondist in the 60s and 70s, but exactly because I know Africa, I have no real answer. My answer, we have our conclusion then was trade not aid. But I don't think that this now is a value conclusion now. I have really no answer in the global context. But you asked also what is in the industrialized countries like Switzerland, like Germany, the reaction and the strategy towards the digital revolution. Industry 4.0 and Internet of Things and robotics and so on. I think our answer is an adult educational system, also with people being in work with 35 years, with 40 years or 45 years. With the new technologies, further education, not a full school, but an education, a training with the new skills and the new technologies during the work. We have in Switzerland about 28,000 people coming from the universities, but we have 27,000 per year coming from the higher vocational education, höhere Berufsbildung, which is according to systematics, tertiary B. This means not a full school education, for instance, not an abstract computer knowledge and programming, but a technological education inside the branch and specific oriented to the branch. That is important. We have in Switzerland 230 professions in the vocational education training system, but we have 450 degrees in this further education. We have only about around the digitalization and computer knowledge, we have more than 100 specific degrees, but always specific. And then they do not need to be so strong in language. We have even people who are not able to make German phrases. German is a quite difficult language, as you know. But everybody is in struggle with the language. But the same people, they have a practical intelligence and also the willing, with 35 or 40 or 45 years, to go 3 years to school while they are working. And this is perhaps one of the answers to that. In Germany and in Switzerland, we must not be afraid that we have so many unemployed people because of the digitalization. We have also, but I think that the great majority of the workforce can be educated. But we cannot, as in the United States, have company or management philosophy waiting until the new university degree people come to the company. The companies themselves have to send them to further education. That is, for me, one of the key strategies. And finally, I say it again, educational policy is economic policy, and economic policy is educational policy. And many managers, in Switzerland, even the top managers in the companies, every 4 or 5 years they change. And the great majorities of the managers do not know this interaction between these two fields. But I think this is, for the rich countries, the strategy.
Thank you. I'll give you 2 nice examples. I was recently to Manila, and in Manila you have now service centers building up rapidly. It's called business services, and it gives job opportunities to young Philippine citizens. They all have a computer degree, IT degree, and they do, in the IT era, in the digital world economy, the job round the clock, and they have very good payment compared to the rest of the Philippines. It shows us that market access for these services can be engineering, it can be web services, it can be customer service. They are building up rapidly. They overtook this year India. I always thought India is #1 for business service. No, it's now the Philippines. That's one fantastic example where we see a new generation, a new growth potential. Not everyone in the Philippines has to work in these centers, by no way, but this creates income for the whole society if they continue like this. The second success story for me is Vietnam. Vietnam used to be extremely poor and used to have regular, unfortunately, cycles of starvation. And the communist government said, whatever we have in growth rates in our economy, we are committed to root out starvation in our country. It's a big population, 93 million Vietnamese. It's very rural in many areas with difficult access, but they almost succeeded. And I believe they are fully committed to totally root it out, as the Chinese have rooted it out some 20 years ago. So here you see that even you have high growth rates in an economy, you need a government to look after the poorest, the weakest in your society. And the two examples can show us that make sure that all the countries have policies that you have a so-called better growth. That does not mean the GDP growth per head, but the growth in the poorest in the societies. Because then the society as a whole will take a big benefit out of globalization. If you miss that point, then go to Cairo and talk to the people there. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So we've heard a whole range of points today which are kind of connected to your question. I mean, on one level it's about governance and about the role of government, about governments being representative and responsive not only to the needs of the most privileged but the less privileged. We heard that kind of throughout the talk. That question of the poor parts of the population actually having representation but also having voice. Because as we've also heard, there's a dynamism. Economies don't only grow because of the most educated and the richest people. There's a great deal of grey economy or unofficial economy that can be brought into the economy. I mean, India's trying to do this right now. With whether it's going to work, I'm not an expert, but this kind of idea towards a switch to everybody having their own digital wallet, reduction in the amount of cash economy. They're trying to bring some of the grey economy into the mainstream economy because it's dynamic. So you need to be aware of what the poorest million are doing, and not just ignoring that and make policies for the richest part. There needs to be some kind of property rights, and I think we've all taken for granted. But it's such a basic thing we've taken for granted. And there needs to be some kind of predictable legal system. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's quite good if it's relatively predictable, so that we have some idea of certainty. There needs to be access to capital, whether it's a micro loan or something else. There needs to be access to education, because we've heard again and again, whether for whoever it is, there needs to be access to education. And if you go back to a guy who actually heard that you have to think about economics, and you have to think about literature and everything else. There is one guy from the north of India who's covered most of these areas at some point in his life. His name is Jean-Pierre Lehmann. You go back to his work, not just education in general, but make sure you educate women. Because if you educate women, it changes their social status, it reduces, over a period of time, you start to slow down population growth, but you also very quickly slow down the number of children who are dying. It changes dynamics, there's more money invested in families. I mean, you can go to his work. It's very important in this area. Social mobility is important, because if mobility is blocked, then people look for other ways to achieve their realization. And people need a way to be able to get access to money so they can feel independent. And whether that's because salaries are a reasonable level, because they have a right to certain social services, whether it's, I mean, there are arguments not just here, but in lots of places, and also in emerging economies about degrees of fixed income. Is there an idea about fixed income? The arguments for and against it are very different in different countries. But we're coming to a point where maybe if our economy does start to radically change, how are we going to make sure that people have access to financial resources so they can be independent? Because dependency is an issue. So there's a whole range of things. We
talked about today, and it's been fascinating to have 4 such excellent guests. And I'm going to have to, unfortunately, wrap up. I'm getting lots of signals as we're way over time, actually. Just to say thank you very much to, in order, Dr. Jan Atteslander, Dr. Rudolph Strahm, Dr. Kristyna Ters, and of course, Dr. Jean-Pierre Lehmann. Possibly you're all going to leave with some gold, but it's not really Swiss gold.
Well, it actually is. We, the project teams, prepared gifts for our guests. It was extremely interesting to all of you. I think we can all agree that we learned a lot from you, and it was an honor to all of us to have you here. So we prepared a Swiss gin for you, which actually has real gold flakes in it.
Yes, I'll start with Jean-Pierre Lehmann. It was a great honor that you joined our 4 international projects at the University of Applied Sciences. I think it was a great opportunity to learn from your knowledge about globalization. So thank you very much for your time and effort to come to Olten and to tell us more about globalization. Thank you very much.
It was really a great honor and a great pleasure to be here. And I look forward to staying in close touch for many, many more years, on many occasions. Thank you very much, and congratulations again.
And of course, some of you may knew her from her classes, her lectures, and we thought we would invite a woman with power, with knowledge, and who actually also looks very good. Thank you very much for being here today. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Ters.
I see some of you in my lectures, but not just because of the looks, right?
So I would like to thank you, Rudolph Strahm. Thank you for being here. It was very nice to listen to your expertise, and thank you for your many years serving our country in our parliament.
Thank you very much, and I wish that everybody coming from another country also goes to see Switzerland, go to the Alps, and if you do not make skiing, you can at least see many interesting points in the Alps. Switzerland is not only banks. Switzerland is also Magdeburg and Toblerone. Have also some of it.
And Mr. Atteslander, thank you very much for being here too. It was really interesting to also have someone from Economy Swiss and to get some insights about the institution and all the work you're doing. Thank you very much.
I can tell you that your applause was very nice. These days, as someone from Economy Swiss, that's quite rare that I get some applause. I wish you all the best for your career as business leaders, wherever you do, whatever you do, and all the best for you, and have a good career. Thank you.
I'm going to continue with the final speech of Professor Michael G. Of course, yeah, it's a final speech. So, before continuing to that, we also prepared a little bit smaller gift for you. Not only because you're the supervisor of all project, but also for always helping us. As we learned, sometimes we have to move things quickly, do things quickly, and if we ask you for something, we do it in that manner. So we prepared a little gift for you in the name of all the project teams.
Very nice.
Sorry. So before we give the microphone to Michael G, we just have some small announcements for this afternoon. As you might be aware, there is the career fair in the afternoon. We will start around 2 o'clock, so feel free to just join the career fair over there after the lunch. There won't be a really real official beginning, but just join and we will then give you a little gong. And then to start to do networking, use this really good opportunity to get to know our partners and to train your networking skills. And there's also the opportunity of the CV check. So if you haven't got a slot yet, feel free to just pass by the students' career stands. They will have a look at your CV, and if you have a slot at Leonie Studer AG or Accenture, then please be on time there. You only got 7 minutes, so if you're 2 minutes late, only 5 minutes will be left, so be there on time. And if you have any questions, then go to Natalia Setz or myself, and we can figure it out. And then on 3:30 or 4, the apéro will begin. So then you can move from the career fair to the apéro, and then some alumni will join us, so we can get to know even more new people and just enjoy ourselves. And then in the evening, you're all also invited to join us at the Matze bar, and then to just celebrate the ending of the whole preparatory seminar week. And last but not least, we also want to thank you, our supervisors, for all your help. The whole project wouldn't work without you, not even as they are working now. So thank you very much for all your support, and that we can always come to you. Thank you very much.
So I'm not going to make a speech, but there are a lot of people we need to thank. So I'm going to run through quite a lot of names very quickly. I'll start more slowly. I may pick up speed towards the end, and I'll try not to stand in front of the slides. So we have these 4 projects, and you've heard all about them throughout the week and how they've been going on for many, many years. And we're very, very proud of them. The projects don't organise themselves. They don't happen automatically. It takes a lot of people doing a great deal of work to make them happen every year. So let's think about some of those people. First of all, we have sponsors, and you can see how many sponsors we have. If you put them all on one side, it starts to get quite scary and quite messy. Now, some of these sponsors have been there forever. Some of these sponsors are new. Titoni has been there since the first day. Not everybody knows Titoni very well, but they've supported us from the very beginning. Blaser support all 4 projects. We have new sponsors, and they may be 2 years old, they're not updated like Swiss Re. So we have a huge range of companies. And the money from those companies goes directly to supporting the cost of the students so they can travel. So we take it and put it in a separate foundation, which is also run by the students, and it reduces their travel costs. Without them, the projects wouldn't happen. Of course, without the school, it wouldn't happen either. But thank you very much to the sponsors. So that's the first round of applause. And I think quite a lot of these sponsors are going to be over there in the careers fair afterwards, so they're also going to try and hire you afterwards. Then, of course, when we start moving internally, every project has their own supervisor, somebody who's expert in that area and guides the project team throughout. And for China, we have Yu Fan Yang, who was sitting here just now, and he's hidden. He's on. Ah, he's just there. Yes, okay. He will be. Oh, he's right at the back. Just came back in. So Yu Fan, thank you very much. For Focus India, Peter Perrett, who's right here. For connectUS, Dr. Anita Graf, who's right here. And for Explore ASEAN, Dr. Teresa Freiburg-Haus. I think they all need You'll notice that there have been people filming, taking photographs, writing things down, posting on more social media platforms than I have time to follow. I'm going to start reading novels and books instead, which I used to do. But we have great PR teams who work very hard to publicise these. And if I run through, and I hope I get in order, we have Van Im, and we have Colin Köpfli, and we have Caroline Höckle and Andrea Husic, and we have Fabienne Galli and Julian Weil, and we have Kristyna Ters, and oh, that's difficult because I still haven't learned how to say their names. And we have Minna. Okay, I'm sorry, I have to learn how to pronounce Vietnamese, but I think they all need a round of applause. Of course, there are 4 people sitting here, and they've had the lead responsibility for this week for each of their projects. And I'll come back to them in a moment. But nothing here works alone. It's not that one person from one project makes something happen. So although Driton has kind of had the lead for Inside China here, Noel for connectUS, and Catherine for Focus India, and Louisa for Explore ASEAN, they couldn't even begin to do this by themselves. So there's a much bigger team that's behind them. And you see, it starts to get long, this list. So for Inside China, Mikhail Tran, Xiaolu Jian, Driton Salami, and Tobias Marti, you should come up here, please. Applause till the end. There's a lot of names here. For Focus India, Denise Marder, Natania Setz, Catherine's already there, and Roberto Duarte. Come on up. For connectUS, Julia Bachmann, Simon Martin, Noel's already here, and Rafael Ciavetti. For Explore ASEAN, Umberto Verde, Timo Detweiler, Louisa is already here, and Tobias Merki. From the beginning, these programs have been designed to be run by students for students. We talk about the sponsors, the school does an amazing amount, the supervisors do an amazing amount, but in the end, they're the people that do all of this. And you're only halfway through, you've still got to travel. So thank you very much for everything you've done so far. Have a great afternoon, and great luck on your travels. Thank you again. Enguerta. The only non-English thing I said today, but enjoy your lunch. Enguerta.
Wir gehen zusammen noch in die
Ist eine Zeit lang gestanden hier, hä?
Das ist absolut super.